The village of Santa Lucia rested quietly in a narrow valley surrounded by vineyards and dark green hills. From above, it looked like a small cluster of stone houses gathered around a single church tower that rose proudly in the center of the square. Life in Santa Lucia moved slowly. Every morning the church bell rang across the rooftops, echoing through the valley like a familiar voice greeting the day. Bakers opened their wooden shutters before sunrise, and the smell of warm bread drifted through the narrow streets. Farmers walked toward their vineyards with baskets and tools, while children hurried along the cobblestone paths on their way to the small village school. Nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen there. Everyone knew each other. Every face in the village was familiar, and that was why the events of one winter night would later become a story whispered from house to house for many years. At the far edge of the village stood a small stone house surrounded by bare winter trees. In that house lived a young woman named Elena and her little son Matteo. Elena had grown up in Santa Lucia. After her husband died in a fishing accident several years earlier, she raised Matteo alone. Life had not been easy, but she worked hard and never complained. During the day, she helped at the bakery in the village square, and in the evenings she returned home to care for her son. Matteo was 7 years old. He had bright eyes and a curious mind. The boy loved to run through the vineyards and ask questions about everything he saw: birds in the sky, the shapes of clouds, the stories behind the old stone buildings in the village. But one winter week, Matteo became very sick. At first it seemed like a simple fever. Elena placed cold cloths on his forehead and gave him medicine the doctor had left during his last visit. But the fever did not go away. Instead, it grew worse. By the third day, Matteo was too weak to leave his bed. His breathing became slow and heavy, and the color faded from his face. Elena felt fear slowly growing inside her. The doctor who usually visited the village lived in a nearby town several kilometers away, and the narrow mountain road between the towns was difficult even in good weather. That evening, dark clouds began gathering over the valley. The wind grew stronger. Rain started falling against the windows of Elena's small house. By nightfall, the storm had become violent. Thunder rolled across the hills, and flashes of lightning lit the vineyards for brief moments before the valley fell back into darkness. Inside the small house, candles flickered beside Matteo's bed. Elena sat beside him holding his hand. His skin burned with fever. "Please stay with me," she whispered softly. Matteo did not answer. Outside, the storm grew louder. Wind rattled the shutters. Rain struck the roof like thousands of small stones. Elena felt helpless. She had tried everything she knew: the medicine, cold cloths, even prayers she had not spoken since she was a child. But nothing seemed to help. Late in the night, when the storm was at its worst, Elena knelt beside the bed and covered her face with her hands. Her voice trembled. "Please," she whispered into the quiet room. "Someone help my son." For several moments, nothing happened. Only the sound of the storm outside. Then suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Slow, gentle. Elena lifted her head. No one came to houses during storms like this. The knock came again. And in that moment, Elena had no idea that the answer to her desperate prayer was already standing outside her door. The knock on the door came again. Slow, gentle, almost as if the person outside did not want to frighten anyone inside the house. Elena slowly stood up from beside Matteo's bed. For a moment, she simply listened. The storm still roared outside. Rain struck the roof, and wind pushed against the shutters, making them creak against the stone walls. But through the sound of the storm, she heard the knock again. 3 quiet taps. Elena's heart beat faster. No one from the village would walk through such a storm at this hour. The streets would be empty, and everyone would be inside their homes waiting for the weather to pass. Yet someone was clearly standing outside her door. She picked up a small candle and walked slowly across the room. The flame flickered as she moved. When she reached the door, Elena hesitated. "Who is there?" she called softly. For a moment there was no answer. Then a calm voice spoke through the door. "I heard someone calling for help." The voice was gentle, warm, not the voice of someone lost or afraid. Elena slowly opened the door. Cold air and rain rushed inside. Standing on the small stone step outside the house was a woman. She wore a long pale blue cloak that covered her shoulders and fell almost to the ground. Strangely, although the rain fell heavily around her, the cloak did not seem soaked or heavy with water. Her dark hair rested softly over her shoulders. Her face was calm, peaceful, There was something about her presence that immediately made the storm feel less frightening. Elena stared at her in surprise. I'm sorry, Elena said nervously. Do I know you? The woman shook her head gently. No, she replied. But I heard your voice. Elena frowned slightly. My voice? The woman nodded. You were asking for help. Elena felt a chill move through her. Only moments earlier she had whispered those words beside Mateo's bed. No one outside the house could have heard her. Yet the woman spoke with complete certainty. Elena, the woman said softly. May I see your son? Elena blinked in surprise. She had never told the woman Mateo's name. Who are you? Elena asked quietly. The woman's eyes were kind. A mother, she said. The answer was simple, but somehow it felt deeper than the words themselves. The storm outside seemed to soften. The wind quieted. Elena hesitated only a moment longer. Then she stepped aside. Please, she said. The woman entered the house. Her steps were quiet across the wooden floor. The small room was dimly lit by candlelight, and shadows moved gently across the walls as the flame flickered. The woman walked toward the bed where Mateo lay. For a moment she stood beside him in silence. Elena watched nervously. Mateo's breathing was still slow and heavy. The woman knelt beside the bed. She placed one hand gently on the boy's forehead. Her voice was calm, soft. Do not be afraid, she said. Elena, your son will be safe. Elena felt the room grow strangely still. The storm outside seemed to fade into the distance. For a moment there was only silence. Then slowly, Mateo's breathing changed. It became deeper, stronger. Elena stepped closer to the bed, her heart racing. The woman's hand remained gently on the boy's forehead. And in that quiet moment, Elena felt something she had not felt all night. Hope. Elena stood beside the bed, barely breathing. The candlelight flickered softly across the small room, casting long shadows against the stone walls. Outside, the storm still raged across the valley, but inside the house everything seemed strangely quiet. The woman in the blue cloak kept her hand gently on Mateo's forehead. Her eyes were calm, peaceful. Elena watched every movement carefully, afraid that if she blinked the moment might disappear. For days she had watched her son grow weaker. His fever had burned like fire beneath his skin. His breathing had become shallow and slow, and nothing Elena tried seemed to help. But now something was changing. Mateo's breathing grew steadier. His chest rose and fell more deeply with each breath. The tension that had filled the room slowly began to fade. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. What are you doing? She whispered softly. The woman did not look away from the child. I am reminding him that he is not alone, she said quietly. Her voice carried a calm warmth that seemed to fill the room. Elena felt a strange peace settle over her heart. For the first time since Mateo became sick, the fear that had gripped her all night began to loosen. The woman slowly removed her hand from the boy's forehead. For a moment nothing happened. Then, Mateo moved. His fingers twitched slightly beneath the blanket. Elena gasped. Mateo, she whispered quickly, leaning closer to him. The boy's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, he opened his eyes. For a moment he looked confused, as if waking from a long dream. Then he turned his head slightly. Mom, he said weakly. Elena could not hold back her tears. Yes, Mateo, she said quickly, taking his hand. I'm here. The boy blinked slowly. The storm is loud, he murmured. Elena laughed softly through her tears. Yes, she said, but it will pass. Mateo's eyes moved toward the woman standing beside the bed. She was here, he said quietly. Elena turned toward the woman. She helped me, Mateo continued. She told me everything would be all right. Elena felt her heart beating faster. She looked at the woman with gratitude filling her chest. Thank you, she said softly. But the woman simply smiled. Her expression was gentle, almost motherly. You asked for help, she replied, and help was given. Elena wiped her tears. I don't even know your name, she said. The woman looked toward the small window where rain still tapped softly against the glass. Then she turned back. My name has been spoken by many people, she said. Sometimes in joy, sometimes in sorrow. Elena did not fully understand the words, but something about them made her heart feel strangely calm. For several moments the room was quiet again. Mateo's breathing was steady now. The fever that had burned through his body seemed to be fading. Elena turned again to thank the woman properly, but when she looked beside the bed, the woman was gone. The small room stood exactly as it had before. The candle flickered beside the wall. Rain continued falling outside, but the woman in the blue cloak had disappeared. Elena stared toward the door. It had never opened. No footsteps had crossed the wooden floor. Yet she was gone. Mateo squeezed Elena's hand gently. "Mom," he said quietly. "The lady said not to be afraid." Elena looked down at her son, her heart filled with a quiet certainty she could not explain. Somehow she knew that the woman who had visited her house during the storm had not been an ordinary traveler. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the valley of Santa Lucia, Elena would begin to understand who had truly come to answer her prayer. The storm slowly faded before dawn. During the night, the wind had finally grown quiet, and the rain that had pounded the valley for hours became only a soft whisper against the rooftops of Santa Lucia. Inside the small stone house, Elena had fallen asleep beside Mateo's bed. Her head rested gently on the edge of the mattress, her hand still holding her son's. When the first light of morning entered the room through the window, Elena slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, she did not move. She simply listened. The storm was gone. Outside, she could hear the quiet sounds of the village beginning to wake, the distant crowing of a rooster, the creak of a wooden door opening somewhere down the road, and the faint ringing of the church bell announcing the new day. Then suddenly she remembered the night before. Elena sat up quickly and looked toward Mateo. The boy was awake. He sat quietly in the bed, looking out the window where the pale morning sunlight filled the room. His face was no longer pale. The fever that had burned through him for days had disappeared. "Mateo," Elena said carefully. The boy turned and smiled. "Good morning, Mom." Elena felt tears immediately fill her eyes. "You feel better?" she asked. Mateo nodded. "My head doesn't hurt anymore." Elena touched his forehead gently. His skin was cool. The fever was gone. For several seconds, she simply held him, unable to speak. The fear of the night before had vanished like the storm clouds that once covered the valley. "Do you remember anything?" Elena asked quietly. Mateo thought for a moment. "The lady," he said. Elena looked at him carefully. "What lady?" "The one in the blue cloak," Mateo replied. "She touched my head." Elena felt a chill run through her. "What did she say?" Mateo looked thoughtful. "She told me not to be afraid," he said. "And she said you would always take care of me." Elena hugged him again. Later that morning, after Mateo had eaten and rested, Elena walked slowly through the village streets. The air smelled fresh after the storm. Water still dripped from the rooftops, and small streams ran along the cobblestone paths. People greeted her as they passed, unaware of the miracle that had taken place during the night. Without fully thinking about it, Elena walked toward the village church. The wooden door stood open. Inside the church, the air was cool and quiet. Sunlight passed through the tall windows, illuminating the stone floor in soft golden patterns. Elena walked slowly toward the front of the church. There, beside the altar, stood a statue of the Virgin Mary. The stone figure wore a long cloak carved in gentle, flowing lines. A cloak that looked exactly like the one the mysterious woman had worn the night before. Elena stood still for a long time. Her heart beat slowly. The calm voice, the gentle smile, the way the storm had quieted the moment the woman touched Mateo's forehead. Suddenly everything made sense. Elena knelt quietly before the statue. She lowered her head and whispered softly, "Thank you." The church was silent. But in that quiet moment, Elena felt the same peace she had felt in the small room the night before. Outside the church, the village of Santa Lucia continued its ordinary day. Farmers walked toward their fields. Children laughed in the streets. The bell rang again across the valley. Life moved forward just as it always had. Yet from that day on, Elena never forgot the night when a woman in a blue cloak knocked softly on her door during the storm. A quiet visitor, a mother who came when someone called for help. And the people of Santa Lucia would later say that sometimes, on stormy nights, a gentle figure could still be seen walking through the narrow streets of the village, watching, waiting, listening for the voices of those who needed hope. Because a mother's love, they believed, never truly leaves the world. And sometimes, when the night is darkest, heaven comes quietly to the door.